tere tulemast Deltakutse podcasti. Kui meditsiin on see, mis paneb sinu südame kiiremini põksuma, siis oled sattunud täpselt õigesse kohta. Mina olen doktor Karl-Oliver Tomson ja täna oleme kokku pannud midagi eriti ägedat. Meil on tulekul teine osa seerias Superkangelased ning tänane külaline on tulnud Deltakutse stuudiosse otse Suurbritanniast. Mul on suur au tutvustada Briti armee koloneli, anestesioloog doktor Giles Nordmanni. So, Giles, I made a brief introduction in Estonian, so I'm gonna switch over to English, and it's an enormous honor to have you on board this second English episode of Deltakutse. So how are you finding Estonia so far?
It's a lovely country. I'm very grateful for being invited to be involved in a number of things here over the next few days, including this podcast, obviously. And I hope your introduction was as polite as your few words in English were, and you weren't saying anything bad about me. But lovely country, some really friendly people, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here, and our last English episode was truly that guest speaker was in Canada. So it was over Skype, so it wasn't as good as this one. And as you mentioned earlier as well, so we're going to have Delta conference. So it's our first Deltakutse conference, which is going to take place tomorrow. And Giles will be our keynote speaker there. Once this episode airs, then the conference has already ended. And we will definitely release some videos and presentations of that conference as well. And I can already say, at least when the episode airs, that there will be another conference next year as well. So it's going to be Delta Conference 2026, which will take place on 6th of February 2026. So it's a lovely number, 0602 2026. And you can buy tickets for that already. So we have early bird tickets already out there. And we're going to try to make it as cool or maybe even cooler than this year. And really try to be a fresh, innovative and a new face in the conference scene, at least in the medical sector. But coming back to today's talk, I'm really happy to have you on board here, Giles. Can you tell us a bit? So you have loads of different titles, different professions. You have had a really long career in civil medicine and also in military medicine. Can you tell us a little bit about to our audience? Who are you?
Yeah, so I'm going to translate that as in a long career because I'm quite old now, which is a pity. In my mind, I'm still a 21-year-old man. Yes, you're correct. I do have a number of titles, but essentially I am a colonel in the British Army, but I am an anaesthetist, and I'm now actually in charge of all the anaesthetists within defence within the UK. And what you're kind of referring to is lots of previous jobs. I have done different jobs throughout my career. One of my last jobs was working in an innovation lab, trying to find new things that would bring benefit to the defence medical services in the UK and make patients' lives better and try and basically improve their care. And we can maybe talk about that another time, but
yeah, that's really interesting, and I think as you mentioned as well that we'll try to divide this podcast or this talk, so it's a bit different than usual Deltakutse podcast episodes. So we won't have like an ambulance case that we're gonna follow. We're just gonna focus on Giles and his life. So we're gonna follow that. But maybe we're gonna start. Like how did you find how did you go into military medicine? What's maybe the key learning points, and then we're gonna look into the future as well, because as sad as it is, then the area that you're working on is maybe more present or more how do you say real that it ever has been. So we're gonna talk about that as well. Maybe a quick clarification. In Estonia, we're used to that anesthetists. So we call our nurses anesthetists, but in England, anesthetist is the same that is anesthesiologist in Estonia. So it's medical. So you have to finish your medical degree and in Estonia it's 4. For me, it's 4 years residency, but now it's 5 years. And I think in the UK, anesthesia residency is really long. How long was it?
7 years.
7 years. So that's crazy. So you did all the 7 years.
Yeah, but 7 years after doing at least 2 years of foundation.
Oh, it's after that, so
yes,
it's 9 years
so
in total.
From graduating from medical school, it would be 9 years. Would be the fastest you could do it.
Okay.
But for me, it was a bit longer because I was doing other stuff with the military.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. But you already mentioned that 20-year-old Giles. Let's go back to that time. So when you were 21, or when did you finish your medical studies?
I went to medical school quite young, actually. So I actually spent 7 years. I did an extra degree. But I actually joined the military. I joined the army when I was 21 and I was still a medical student before graduating, yes. And in the UK medical school system, you do 2 years of preclinical. So you're in the labs, you're in anatomy, doing your dissection of cadavers, learning about your physiology. And it isn't until your third year that you then go into the hospitals and to see patients. And so it was year 3 for me, and I went into the hospitals, which is the NHS, this sort of state system in the UK. And all the junior doctors were not very happy for lots of different reasons. At that time, it was not unusual to be working 100 hours a week. There was great competition for certain specialties. The pay was not great. And I thought, well, who else am I going to work for? And then a friend of my father's, who was in the army, said, well, why don't you try the army?
Okay.
And I went down and visited army doctors for a couple of days and was inspired that this is something different that I could maybe do. And I went through a selection process and joined as a medical student.
Okay, but how does a medical student, or what does a medical student do in the army? Or how did it...
So for me, it was mostly playing rugby. They just want you to do your medical studies. So they're basically securing you to be a military doctor once you've become a doctor.
Okay, so you don't have to go in the front lines. You don't have to go, in the harsh training that we see in the movies.
No.
You got to play rugby.
I got to play rugby, yeah. Well, I had a choice. There's a thing at our universities called the Officer Training Corps. So if you're thinking about joining the military, you can join the Officer Training Corps. But they met up on a Wednesday and a Saturday, and I was playing rugby on a Wednesday and a Saturday. And I said to the army, what would you like me to do? Do you want me to go to the Officer Training Corps or play rugby? And they said play rugby. So the one main thing I did have to do as a medical student was I had to play for the Army Medical Services rugby team. So they would fly me down in the middle of the week, and I would go and play rugby for them. That was maybe the hardest thing I had to do was a medical student. But don't worry, they got payback later on.
But that doesn't sound too bad. Unfortunately, rugby is not very popular in Estonia, but as much as I know it and as much as I watched it, I feel like if you play rugby, then it prepares you for hand-to-hand combat as well, because it's really, like American football without the pads and without the defenses, right?
It is. Maybe slightly more polite than hand-to-hand combat, but yeah, there's physical interaction definitely.
Okay. And once you were a medical student, you went through those 4th, 5th, 6th year, and in the army you played rugby. Once you finished graduated medical school, then you were like a full-blown army doctor, or how did it go from there?
So after that, in the UK, we do what was used to be called House Officer Year, and now called Foundation Year, which is now 2 years. But it's basically consolidating what you do as a medical student, become full registered with the General Medical Council. So I did that year. And then knowing that I was going to do something in the army next, I actually went and worked in what used to be called accident emergency, what we now call emergency department. So I did that for 6 months. And then I had training ready to be an army doctor. So I had to go to Sandhurst, where all army officers go to. And I had to do a sort of shortened course at Sandhurst. And then I did a number of other sort of courses over a few months, which basically taught me, one, how to be an officer in the medical services. And then there's a more clinical part, which is how to be a medical officer in the medical services, ready for me to then join a regiment as their doctor. And that's what I did straight after that. I went and joined a number of regiments, and I was the doctor for that regiment.
Okay, but was there any part of like civil medical as well, or was it so it transitioned into like a military medicine, or how was there a balance?
So that year and a half, that was all in state hospitals. That's in the NHS, so that was all completely civilian. And then that military training basically converted me from a civilian doctor into a very junior military doctor. And then I joined a regiment where I was the only doctor for looking after between 600 and 800 soldiers, and then went wherever they had to go. So my first battalion I joined were an infantry battalion, and we went out to Belfast, to Northern Ireland, where there was still, at that time, in the late 90s, there was still difficulties going on there. And then straight after that, I volunteered to do parachute training and did the selection process for airborne forces, and then went and joined a couple of parachute regiments and went around with them to a number of places around the world, went as their doctor.
When I asked Giles about giving me some fun facts about himself, one of the fun fact was that you can parachute. So I imagine that once you were a doctor in the parachute regiment, then you had to jump out of the plane yourself as well.
I did, yes. It's not very pleasant.
So, but it's and it's a low altitude jumping, right? So it's the parachute opens immediately after you jump out, right?
Correct. Static line. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you're trying to throw out as many people as possible as quickly as possible. So normally between 600 and 800 feet. So you're in the air for 30 and 40 seconds. You don't want to be in the air for too long because you're a target. So one of the best parachute jumps I did was actually with the Americans. We went across, so it was 3 parachute regiment battalion went, and we went as a surgical team that could go with them and parachute out with them. But that was within I think it was at least a brigade. So no, it would have been more than that. So essentially, in total, it was 2,000 people parachuting.
Okay.
So we did that in America. So in a pretend airfield, actually an old airfield, from no one on the ground to 2,000 people on the ground took about 20 minutes.
That's
amazing experience.
Any injuries jumping out?
Lots of injuries. Yep. Normally there's about 5% rate of injury. There were a lot of fractures. There was one who had a parachute fail, who had crushed lumbar vertebra, pelvic fracture, bilateral femur fracture. He came off the DZ, the drop zone, losing his radial pulse. And we stabilized him and then took him to the trauma unit, which was just nearby. So it was in a sort of well-populated area of America where we were doing it. But,
yeah. So a medical team can't be happy for long once they land, have to get to work. We have a lot of listeners. I'm really proud of that we have a lot of listeners that are medical students, that are either studying to be a doctor, nurse, paramedic, all different kinds. What would you recommend if someone is listening and finds this military career extremely inspiring? What's your recommendations? How to get into it? Do you have to start playing rugby?
No, you don't have to play rugby. That's not obligatory, but useful. So I think it just depends on what they want to aspire to, isn't it? And with all of these things, it's trying to find out as much as you can about what that prospective job is going to be. Some people are just quite happy working in the state system and being a normal doctor. But if you want to think about doing something different, then the military, I think, is a very good option. I think there's probably 2 good options if you want to do something different, humanitarian and military. And we can talk about humanitarian because I've had a bit of experience of that. But the military, it's for me, it's given me lots of things, lots of opportunities that I wouldn't have got otherwise. So everything from, the pinnacle of my career was going in the helicopter in Afghanistan and going to the front line and picking up injured people and saving their lives and bringing them back into the hospital in Afghanistan. Everything from that to walking across Greenland, medical cover for an expedition, going into the depths of the jungle in Borneo, parachuting with 2,000 people, setting up a hospital in South Sudan for the United Nations by a refugee camp, snowboarding, sailing, rugby, just a whole breadth of things that it could, gave me the opportunity to do that you wouldn't get the opportunity elsewhere. But at the heart of it all is, why am I in the military? I'm lucky to live in a democracy where people have got the ability, have got the freedom to express their views and vote and do what they want. And the only reason we can do that is that we have an army, we have got a military that can defend our country if need be. I was thinking about this the other day, actually. There's a good George Orwell quote. I'm trying to remember it correctly. It's something like, you can sleep safely at night because hard men are ready to do violence upon bad people in the night. So anyway, those soldiers are prepared to put their lives on the line, and someone needs to look after them. And that was my job, and I'm very proud to be able to have done that. Mm-hmm. I was trained to be able to live in that environment and look after these people, and then given the clinical skills to be able to save their lives. And I think that's a good calling for someone, that sort of service to the community, the population, to those people.
Mm-hmm. That's really inspiring, and I think that definitely gave a lot of listeners perspective as well, and inspiration to drive, to go forwards. One of the most popular episodes that we have is a medical helicopter episode. So we have, in Estonia, we don't have a specialized unit, but we have a helicopter that can be used either for medical rescue and transport, and also medevac. But it's also used by the police as well, so it's like a joint experience. But it's one of the most popular episodes, and I recently talked to medical students as well about anesthesiology and about our specialty and promoting it. And a lot of the questions, I would say even the most questions, were about how it is to fly on a helicopter and be on a medical helicopter. So I'm not going to go straight into it, but we're going to definitely go. I'm definitely going to ask questions about that as well.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask about when did you find anesthesiology or anesthesia? Was it did it come soon after joining the military, or did it come later?
So it was in my first few years as a junior doctor. So I said, well, you have to do a year of house officer, as it was then. And then I did that 6 months additional sort of in the A&E, the emergency department. Now, at that time, it's very different now. At that time, I was in the emergency department by myself overnight. So anything coming in, I had to manage. All my seniors were at home in bed. That doesn't happen now. That was, as I said, I'm old. That was a long time ago. And it was a really good challenge at being able to manage multiple patients at any one time, and some of them could be quite ill. In addition to dealing with trauma, as quite a junior doctor, the nurses were brilliant at being able to support and look after the patients. But whenever there was a patient who was either medically very unwell, or whenever a patient came in with trauma, the person who was most useful to have was the anaesthetist. And it always seemed to me, and it was usually because I was probably sleep deprived, stressed, trying to manage so much stuff. Then this anaesthetist would come in completely calm and relaxed, and he would go to a patient, and then everything would be better, and then he would take them away. And I want that job, basically. I want to be the man or woman who turns up and makes everything better and saves the patient and takes them away. So that's what inspired me to want to do anesthesia.
I had the completely same experience. So in Estonia, we don't. It's really interesting to hear about different countries, different how they approach medical education. We don't have foundation years. Our residency is much shorter. Either it's a good or a bad thing. That's another topic. But we can start working in the emergency department when we are still medical students. So after 4th year, so basically on our 5th and 6th year, we can already start working as basically as a physician assistants. So we still have some senior to consult with. But I remember working in emergency department, and I had exactly the same experience that whenever I had a problem, anesthetist or anesthesiologist in Estonia would come and would sort out the problem. And I also really loved their carefree attitude, in a sense that it doesn't matter if it's if you have a coding patient or it's something different. There all the time they were like calm and nice. So that inspired me as well. So, but how did you? So basically, you're starting your medical career. You're doing shifts in different departments. You're jumping out in Belfast in the United States, parachuting, doing anesthesiologist or anesthesia. How did you manage to, do all those things together, or how did it?
So the bit doctor for the regiment was completely separate. So I did that year, then the 6 months in A&E, and then I was just the doctor with the regiment. So it's like being a primary care doctor, essentially. And I did that for 3 years. People normally do it for 2 years, but I had so much fun. I did a bit of extra stuff. And then at the end of that, I want to start doing anesthesiology training.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And then I stopped working for the regiment then, and I basically went into the training scheme that all the civilians do in the UK. I did my 7 years of training within that civilian system with a few changes. And the changes being I got pulled out to do various things, which were actually really useful for me in my future career. And so I went out to Belfast again, but then I went to Iraq in 2003. And I was quite a junior anaesthetist then. And I went to Afghanistan in my last year of training, it was, and flew on the helicopter and worked in the hospital in Afghanistan. Yeah, as part of that training process.
How was Iraq in 2003?
Yeah, really interesting, actually. It's so my anaesthetic practice now, I do 50-50. I do adult practice, which is normally kind of trauma, hepatobiliary, liver resection type stuff. And then the other 50% is actually pediatrics. And a lot of people ask me, why do you do pediatric anesthesia? You're in the army. Surely everyone is adults. There are no child soldiers in the UK, which is correct. I need to make sure you get that on record. No child soldiers.
We won't delete this one.
But in Iraq, we went forward into Iraq and we set up a small hospital. And as soon as we put up the Red Cross, the first 8 patients were children, local children. And then throughout that time, and also in Afghanistan, probably at least 10, sometimes 15% of the patients coming in suffering from ballistic trauma or otherwise were unfortunately children. And whenever there's a child, if people aren't used to dealing with children, and you may be aware of this, it's people get much more stressed. And quite commonly, those people are parents, and that the whole team gets stressed, and those anxiety levels increase. And it does, people do not work as a team as well in that sort of situation. So having familiarity with dealing with children is very useful. And if at least one person in the team knows how to treat a child or has had the experience, they can calm the situation down so people can work much better. And so, yeah, I had that experience, junior anaesthetist. Those 8 children came in. And I went, I'm going to need to do pediatric anesthesia as part of my practice, so I know how to deal with this in the future.
Okay. It must have been really scary, especially being at your first deployment in a conflict zone, I imagine.
It wasn't too bad, because when I'd been a doctor with the regiment, then I'd actually deployed and gone to places. So this was certainly on a bigger scale, but I had the benefit of going and with everyone and not wanting to go off on a tangent. It's really important to have a good mentor when you're going through your training. In fact, as all parts of your life, really. And I went with senior colleagues, one of whom has been a mentor throughout my career, actually, subsequently. And that makes things easier, actually. Yeah. Is
it just something that I thought about myself as well, about especially being in a stage right now when my residency is coming, like I'm going to end my residency, so I'm going to go into like becoming a anesthesiologist. So you recommend finding a mentor, or that is something that has helped you along your career path?
Yeah, definitely. Especially your point in your career. Now, coming to the end of your training and going to be whatever you want to call, we call it consultants when we sort of finish. That's quite a big moment in your life, and I'm sure you've got many questions about what should I be doing, where should I be working, what to expect when I become a independent consultant. And a mentor can help you through that. Definitely, I would recommend it for anyone. Yeah,
that's a good tip. Do you have any other recommendations? How do you've had like definitely like an extreme experience, but do you have any more tips and tricks how to like not crumble under the pressure?
Well, that depends on the situation. I mean, we talked about, I kind of mentioned about, children coming in the sort of military environment and the stress. I think if you prepare and train so you're familiar with your situation, it makes things much easier. So I think probably, I don't know, if you go into a new hospital, you're not quite sure where to find the drugs or the bit of kit. And once you've been there for a while, you're familiar of where these things are. And it's something we're very aware of in the military, because most of us work in the state system, normally in an NHS hospital. But then if you have to deploy, and then you're working in a tent with different people and different equipment and expecting different sort of casualties, everything there is outside of your normal comfort zone. So trying to get people as used to that potential environment as possible is really valuable. So we have a training pathway to ensure that they can do that. And that training pathway is, first of all, introduce you to the new equipment. It's a ventilator you've never used before. We use drawer-over anesthesia that hardly anyone uses, or TIVA with a different sort of syringe pump, that sort of thing. And then getting them used to the medical kind of what we call SOPs, standard operating procedures. So when the ballistic casualty comes in, what do you do as a team? So everyone understands as a team what they have to do in that patient's pathway, and then bring it all together, the whole team who are going away. So that familiarization of what may happen is a crucial part of, I think, of de-stressing.
Does it also include that you really build up tents, as it were, in Iraq or in the UK, for example? So, do simulations while you're still in Great Britain?
Yes, yeah. So before a unit goes anywhere, medical unit goes away anywhere, we've got a training centre where they basically call what we call validation. So they will then, essentially, they will set up their facility, be it in a tent or anywhere else, and it's big enough to accommodate large tented hospitals. And then they get casualties put through there, so either mannequins or actors, and simulated. And they're basically tested as to how they can deal with all those casualties, be that one casualty, two casualties, lots and lots of casualties, to make sure the whole system is working. So it's not just the clinical part of it, but it's everything else that makes it work. Communication. Have they got the equipment they need? Have they got the resupply? Have they got the ability to get casualties in and out? It's just that whole process of being able to sort of function in that different area.
Okay. So going back to the Iraq in 2003, you already mentioned we talked about the mental health difficulties, the organization, teamwork. Do you have any, what are the other biggest challenges of providing anesthesia and critical care in the war zone?
Great question. I think, we kind of mentioned previously the familiarization with the equipment and how you're going to work as a team. That's really a crucial aspect of it. But one of the other things is, I suppose, just talking about kind of providing any medical care is the fact that you're going to be more isolated in quite austere locations, sometimes in extremes of temperature. But I think the key thing is the equipment, and what you have is you only have so much. And it's being used to that uncertainty as to how many casualties are going to come and how you're going to treat them when you only got a certain amount of equipment to treat them. And probably the biggest restriction is blood components, and secondary is probably amount of oxygen. And it's introducing people to the idea that they're not going to be able to do everything for everyone as they do in the NHS and civilian practice. Anyone who comes in, you can throw everything at them to try and save them. It's getting people used to the idea that sometimes you're not going to be able to save people. Sometimes you have to make that decision quite early to realise that we can't give all your blood components to one patient that might save their life when you know there may be 4 others that you can definitely save. And that's a really difficult ethical challenge for people to get their heads round, because it's not something they'd have to do normally. Having said that, people do adapt, and we can see they can adapt, because we saw it certainly in the UK in COVID, and people manage to cope with that sort of decision making, and it's not too dissimilar sometimes.
The COVID really was truly a first, in recent times at least, a long-standing massive accident in a sense, right? Because we didn't have the resources for all the people, so it was something from, I guess, military medicine brought to the civilian medicine.
Yeah, no, I think so, yeah. And I mean, I looked at it like a deployment for me, as if I was going away. It's sort of my mindset changed to, this is actually a military deployment now. And I think it was quite useful, I hope, for our department, our hospital, having military people there to basically talk and mentor people through the difficult things they had to do, like in intensive care. No, normally it's like one nurse, one patient. And, across the UK, we had one nurse looking after 6, 8 in critical care patients, because there weren't enough nurses. But there was a massive patient need.
Okay, Giles, I have to ask the question that I think a lot of our listeners really want to know more about. So you mentioned a bit about medevac and also bringing the medical care to the front lines through helicopters. Can you share a bit about your experience in that field?
Yes, I'd love to. So I think, as I intimated earlier on, it was kind of almost the pinnacle of my career, bringing everything together, both clinical and military skills, to be able to do that. Afghanistan was very different in that we had the ability to do that because we had, in military terms, what you'd call air superiority. So there was very little danger to the aircraft, so they could go quite far forward into essentially where the front line of the battle was. It's very different to civilian pre-hospital practice. So I've flown on the air ambulances in the UK. So there you fly out to a casualty, and then you treat them on the ground. You kind of stabilise them, and you package them, and then you go in the aircraft, and then you fly. So the going in the aircraft part of it, normally for us in the UK, civilian-wise, is just the transport. You do the medical care beforehand. You don't do that in the military. But you can't sit on the ground because people are shooting at you with all sorts of things. So it's dangerous. So you basically land, you put the casualty on, and then you go, and then all your medical care is in the back of the aircraft while you are moving. And that brings a whole different challenge to the medicine you can do in the back of it, essentially. And I don't know how much you're going to put recorded for tomorrow. I don't want to talk about tomorrow too much. Don't want to spoil it, but to sort of come up with some example now to bring light to that is you're working on your knees. You are deafened by the rotors. You can't hear anyone in your team. When you're trying to assess a casualty, you can't listen to their chest or anything. You're just using your eyes and your hands to feel. There's normally sand everywhere as well, and everything smells of aviation fuel. And you're doing quite tight corners, and there's a fine vibration. So actually, intubation and getting the intravenous lines in is all a bit of a challenge. Yeah, so it's a different level of challenge to your clinical care. None of the monitors work, of course. The vibration stopped, the blood pressure cuff working, and the SATS probe doesn't work. And the best you normally got was the defib pads normally give you a kind of cardiac rhythm.
That was first. That was a really good promotion for your lecture. So there's going to be Giles going to talk more about medevac in Delta conference lectures. So there's going to be a video up sooner or later on that. So definitely have a listen or have a look if it's already out when you're listening to it. Then it's a more vivid and a more longer description of all that experience. It's really interesting because, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have one episode when we talked about medical helicopter, and as you said earlier as well, it's usually you go there, you treat, and if you fly, then if you want to do really something like medically invasive, there's an option to land. But imagine if you're in a war zone, you can't just land, right? So, and maybe going back, like, how do you provide safety? So if your helicopter goes there in the front lines, how is it like? Do you have like war helicopters around you? Do you have like people with machine guns? Like as a war, like as I've never been in war, how would you like describe how does it look?
So out there, yes, we never went anywhere without an Apache helicopter. So that's an attack helicopter, and we normally went with 2 of those. So they would go slightly ahead of us and make sure it was secure and safe for us to land to some extent. But if we could call them the enemy, were very good at hiding, so it wouldn't always be perfect. And then the helicopter we were in itself, the reason we were able to do things in it was because it was a Chinook. So for those who don't know much about helicopters, but the Chinook is the only one which has 2 main rotor blades on it. So it's a very big helicopter. It is, and it's actually one of the fastest, which is actually quite useful. It was armoured up to about head height. So, I mean, we used to take small arms fire all the time, but because it was armoured, we were okay. But on that, they had what's called miniguns on each side. So a minigun is like a Gatling gun. It kind of rotates the barrels around, fires like 4,000 rounds a minute. So they can then provide their own defence as we landed and got the casualty on.
Obviously, war is horrible, but that sounds like a scene from a film. You're in a big helicopter with machine guns, and you have 2 war helicopters on either side, and you're flying in to save a patient. That sounds. I understand why you said it. It's one of your pinnacle of your career. It sounds pretty.
Yeah, pinnacle for different reasons. Pinnacle for militarily being able to do that. Pinnacle as in clinically bringing everything that I'd learned together to essentially saving people's lives was the other part of it. And being able to, and again, not really wanting to talk about it tomorrow so much, but someone who, if we hadn't been there, would have died, who survived for what we did, essentially, and what we were able to do.
That sounds like a really rewarding job and also, of course, dangerous. But from a human side, I have to ask you, did you ever get seasick while on a helicopter?
Airsick?
Yeah, airsick.
Has someone been telling tales? No?
Yeah.
Have you been doing some secret? I had the worst air sickness of all the people. It was awful. In fact, it was so bad that once I was even sick on the vehicle driving to the helicopter. I hadn't even got in the helicopter and I was being sick. That is a big challenge. It normally calmed down after 2 weeks, but yes, I was quite well known for being sick and physically sick. So there was one point definitely where I filled 2 sick bags, whilst intubating and ventilating a patient.
So, but you said that it can get better. You can get used to it. Okay, that's as a person who has vomited in an ambulance car countless of times. It's very, very good to hear that that there are other people like me as well and doing greater things. So that's really inspiring. So we're gonna maybe leave the rest of the helicopter talk to your presentation tomorrow, so people can have a listen. So we're gonna do like cross promotion here, and I'm gonna move on a bit. Do you have any You mentioned it earlier as well, but do you have any other, like, what's the key differences between working in military and civilian hospital? Do you have any other differences that come to your mind?
I think what's really important is working well as a team and understanding, certainly when I've been in a leadership position, understanding people's different characters and bringing the best out of people. But generally what happens especially when you're in a difficult environment or challenging for whatever reason may be, whether it's because it's environmentally challenging, it's 50 degrees centigrade and everyone's trying to survive, or, danger, challenging, going to the sort of the front line and getting shot at. It brings people closer together, and that's really important for a number of reasons, I think. That sort of, one, it helps the team work better. I think when everyone recognises each other's strengths and weaknesses, but it gets you closer together. And consequently, I've made some really good friends from being away with the military, and one of whom is an Estonian, and is the fact that I'm here. And that's important for later on as well, because especially when you're seeing really severe trauma, life-changing injuries, repeatedly day after day, it does affect you. And the ability to have someone you can talk to about that is really important for living normally afterwards. Although everyone's heard of PTSD, I have got a lot of colleagues who have gone through stages of PTSD. Being able to, and a lot of people have a problem talking about it to like families because they don't think their family will understand. And families do have difficulty sometimes understanding that. But we do a number of things with people who used to fly on the helicopter to get them together so they can talk to each other. We normally go surfing in the UK in cold water, So another physical challenge, different sort of physical challenge. But it helps people talk about their experiences. And
it's surfing without wetsuits, I imagine.
We use wetsuits.
Oh, okay.
No, yeah.
Maybe that's extreme. Because in Estonia, it's really popular. Winter swimming is really popular.
Okay.
You might see a lot of Estonians going into the water when it's like the lake is completely frozen.
Someone has already threatened to take me winter swimming tomorrow.
Oh, you have to take it. You have to try it out.
Okay.
It's worth it. I really want to move forward in your career because you have one really interesting position as an innovator in the British Army. And maybe going more in the future, looking 5 years, 10 years, where is the military medicine going, where it's heading? You as a leader in that field, where do you think that it's heading? Good question.
I'll try and divide the answer into two, I think. When we talk about clinical direction and then kind of non-clinical direction, if that makes sense.
Sounds good.
So clinical, where is it going or where should it be going? I think probably two things. One, we need to work out how to deal with non-compressible hemorrhage, because that's how people still die in warfare and elsewhere, is bleeding before they can get to a surgeon. And the main reason for that is, something you can't put a tourniquet on. So how do we manage that? How can we develop some of the studies and things that have gone on to the next stage? Is it Roboa? Is it abdominal tourniquet? Is it intraperitoneal foam? I think that's the gap. One of the gaps at the moment is to how we can save those people. And then related to that is blood components, either real blood components, so fresh whole blood is definitely popular, if that's the right word, in America. Their military is very keen on it. We're definitely looking at it in the UK, both in the civilian and military world, challenged by the fact that our blood supply service in the UK doesn't provide whole blood normally. So that's why it's a challenge. And there's a couple of studies that are looking at that ongoing, actually. But it's a logistical challenge to look after that. So what can we use instead? So plasma, freeze-dried plasma, really easy to look after. And plasma is actually good stuff, but what's next that we can use? What are the oxygen-carrying artificial things that can be made, which a lot of people have been working with, but there's no perfect thing yet that can be used to supplement things like that?
We have in Estonia, we have now 2 our regional hospitals have used whole blood. And so far, the empirical evidence or the customer feedback has been really good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's been a few studies out there that have got variable results from fresh whole blood. But there's been some good ones recently. I think Spinella, he's produced a good one, which showed the difference in mortality. But from a case report side, I have used it on ballistic casualties, and it's a patient who's normally very sick and they're coagulopathic, and you give them some fresh whole blood, and it's like magic. They get better. They start clotting. Their gases get better more easily. Whether because you were already going that way or not, whether that had made any difference or not is a little bit difficult to determine. But every time I have used it, it seemed to has had a great effect.
Yeah, it feels like the experience is similar in Estonia as well, and it would be really interesting to see like more large trials on that. And it's really fascinating how it's like we've done like the whole circle in a sense, right? Because whole blood was something that was used in the First World War, was it?
Definitely Second World War. Might be First World War, yeah.
And then it's divided into components. Now we're going back into the first one. But
they were only divided into components because it was easier to look after. You could look after the fresh frozen plasma for years, and the whole blood and the packed red cells. For up to a month or so, whereas fresh whole blood doesn't last that long. So it was purely a logistical reason for doing that. We've gone off on a tangent.
Yeah,
I was going to talk about the non-clinical things.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, so, I mean, related to some of the stuff I did in this innovation lab, and we've seen in Ukraine, certainly, is the utility of unmanned, uncrewed vehicles, rather. So drones, both in the air and on the ground. There certainly is going to be greater use for that logistically to bring in supplies. But also, it will switch to, I think, definitely being used for getting casualties out of dangerous areas where you can't otherwise get into, or tricky areas like urban warfare, where it's very difficult to get in any other vehicle.
It makes perfect sense when you think about it. But do we have like drones capable enough to carry people as well, or how do people get on the drones? Is it some like autonomous lifting mechanism?
I mean, there are a number of designs. So there are companies who've designed ones which are purely for casualty evacuation. But there are drones out there which are cheaper, which will carry 200 kilos. I think they go up to 200 kilos now. Yeah, pretty sure they are. Yeah, where you just need to find some way of attaching a casualty to it. That's the tricky thing. It's going to be a risk, isn't it? Because the drone may get shot down. So then it's an ethical challenge of, should you be putting a patient on an uncrewed vehicle? You don't know whether it's going to make it back or not. I think it's going to be one of those things where, well, if I don't move them, they're going to die. The only way I can move them is to go on the drone. So it's that sort of situation where I think it's going to be used.
But something might happen to a drone as well.
Yeah, something might happen to a drone. Yeah. And then other things... Yeah, AI is obviously increasing. I think more and more people are used to it. Lots of people can sort of access various AI through ChatGPT and all that sort of stuff. There are other AI software programs. But there could be great use for that in a number of things, I think, in the future we should definitely be looking at. And everything from managing difficult logistic chains to looking after people, helping monitor people and their fitness and their ability to work, to... for the military, medical planning, giving it a scenario and it coming up with a medical plan, how best way to look after a casualty in that plan. There's definitely work going on in America about using it as almost a triage tool when you've got like a major incident with lots and lots of casualties, helping the deciding sort of factors within that. One of our surgeons in the UK is looking at how we can use it to help people make decisions on whether to save a leg in a ballistic injury. So what can you put in to help if they've never dealt with that very much? Can this AI tool help them decide, do I need to cut this leg off or will I be able to save this leg? Multiple potential uses out there. So even the basics of how do we make our life better? How can it record our notes and summarize our notes for us so we don't have to spend hours looking through notes?
That's really fascinating. And I've been teaching, or at least right now I'm an instructor candidate in the hospital MIMS course, which is also from the UK. And one of the things there is as well, you have like loads of patients that arrive in the ED, and then you have to do a plan, like who goes to the operation, who doesn't go, who goes to a different hospital, who doesn't. And it's loads. You can see like there's 5 and 6 people and it takes, all their mental energy to just come up with that. But imagine if you put a good input into the AI, it can give you the right answer in 20 seconds or less.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I feel like we're really in a changing landscape, and with the coming of drones, with the coming of AI, in a sense, like in the dawn of the internet or something like huge, something similar. So it's going to be really interesting what's going to come. And one of the really interesting things that I also heard a presentation about how Sweden has used drones to dispatch automatic external defibrillators.
Oh yes, on the scene,
deliver
them.
Yeah, on the scene of the
okay.
accident.
Yeah.
So it's also something that you can, there's a, coding patient or someone who has a heart attack, and the drone just flies and defibrillator just in the scene.
Yeah, exactly. So perfect for countries where it takes a long time for an ambulance to get somewhere. If you can deliver something by drone, that'd be great for that in the civilian world. And one of the things we did related to the military was related to that. So we have training teams that help other countries around the world. And one of our soldiers unfortunately died after being trampled by an elephant. And there was just because they were in a very isolated location, and it took them a long time to get to the next level of care. And these things are going to happen again, where people are working in isolated places, quite far away from any sort of surgical capability. But actually looking after blood and lots of medical equipment is a logistic challenge for them, because they're walking around over long distances. So, but having a drone available, that if someone got injured on their way back, and as they were on their way back, a drone delivered them a tourniquet, tranexamic acid, 2 units of blood, that could make a big difference to someone being able to survive to get to the next level of care.
And as awful as war is, it can really drive progress in that sense, find new solutions, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that really inspiring and eye-opening, and sometimes also not maybe saddening, but like this, not gut-wrenching, but like a real experience from the field. So it was really an awesome experience talking with you, and I'm sure all the listeners had a really similar experience. And we won't have like usual summary that we usually have, but I think we can definitely share loads of different articles that and different topics that we shared or that we talked about in this podcast episode as well. And if definitely look for the Giles's presentation about medevac, so you can have like a longer look into the life of an army doctor who goes to the rescue of the most sickest and injured patients. And thank you so much for coming to this podcast, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Delighted. And I look forward to my cold winter swimming in Estonia.
Yeah. So we're going to keep you updated. If Giles goes into the water, then follow us on social media and we will let you know.
Well, you want photos as well? Oh, no.
That would be the best. On Deltakutse Instagram feed. So that would be something for you to remember Estonia by. So
yeah, being very cold. Yeah, okay.
But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, and see you next time.